Hello out there, YouTube. People who are following my video series on the Lafayette-Lehigh Yuengling Month, as well as casual passersby. Welcome to my third installment of the video series. It's great to have you with me. We got the World Series going on. I got the game back there. Let's try to tilt the screen a little bit. It's going on back there, but we're going to take a break from that for a few minutes and enjoy a third Yuengling lager, while talking more about whatever it is that I feel like talking about leading up to this Lafayette-Lehigh Rivalry Month. I'm actually going to pour the beer this time into my Lafayette College alumni pint glass. So let's do that now. Let's get a proper pour going there. Okay. Today, as I said in my last video, the next couple videos are going to be about the political world right now, what's going on, because Election Day is coming up. Election Day is in 1 week and 1 day from today. Today's Sunday, October 26th. So I figured today I would focus on what's going on in Florida politics. We'll talk some about the gubernatorial race. We'll talk a little bit briefly about the Attorney General race, and we will also hit on a couple of the ballot initiatives that are being proposed as amendments to the Florida State Constitution. So in just a second, we'll get started. Also, I forgot to mention, I should say every video, which I think I've neglected to do so far, let's go Leopards. We're looking forward to it. Game day is just a little under 4 weeks away, so we're all looking forward to it. Yankee Stadium, 150th game, Lafayette-Lehigh football rivalry. So let's start with the Florida gubernatorial race. We have Republican incumbent Charlie Crist, who's just about done with his first term as governor of Florida. We have Charlie Crist, who is challenging Scott as a Democrat. However, he did serve for one term as Florida governor as a Republican a few years back. And then we have Adrian Wiley, right there. I got the shirt on. We have Adrian Wiley running for governor on the Libertarian Party ticket from the Libertarian Party of Florida. So just a couple quick things. I honestly believe that Rick Scott is actually a criminal. He's done several things that were major conflicts of interest. For example, he supported drug testing either state employees or welfare recipients, or both. I'm not really sure. I forget the details. But at the time, he was an owner of one of the two largest drug testing firms in the state, and his attorneys told him it was a blatant conflict of interest, so he handed the company to his wife. That's the type of stuff we deal with here in Florida politics. Rick Scott, as a quote-unquote fiscally conservative governor, has increased the budget in Florida, the state government budget, by $7 billion or $8 billion, something crazy. He's not at all fiscally conservative. He hasn't cut spending. He hasn't done anything dealing with small government at all. The only thing I can give him any credit for is about 2 months ago he passed a slew of pro-gun bills. I did a blog on it, or it was either a blog or a Facebook note on it, and if I can remember correctly, 1 or 2 of the bills I wasn't strongly in favor of, because even though they were pro-gun, they weren't pro-liberty. They were some sort of, well, either way, it doesn't matter. Scott, I do know, regarding gun rights, he does not support open carry. And that is something, and Crist, I'm sure he doesn't support open carry. That is something that Adrian Wiley does support. So that's one great reason to support Wiley for governor. Then, let's see, we mentioned a little bit about Governor Scott. How about Crist? Crist increased spending as well before Scott was governor, between Jeb Bush and Rick Scott. He did increase spending drastically, as far as I know. He increased some regulations, and in addition, some Democrats should know this, especially Democrats who currently support Charlie Crist. Charlie Crist was a Republican who actually supported George Bush when Bush was president of the country. He supported Bush, and he supported the Iraq War as well. So that's something important to note. It's a shame that so many Democrats I speak to, yeah, some of them they'll only support Scott. I'm sorry, they'll only support Crist because he's not Scott. But some of them actually think they like Crist. It must be just because he has a D next to his name. That really, if you have a D next to a name and you're a registered Democrat, you're going to vote for him. There are a lot of people with that mindset, and they like him without really knowing anything about him, certainly not remembering the fact that he supported George W. Bush and he supported the Iraq War. I can go on and on about that, but I think we don't really need to say too much more about Crist than he supported George Bush and he supported the Iraq War. I'm going to try to make this video quick because I do want to get back to the game, and I got a little bit of work to do later. So now let's go on to the candidate who I'm supporting for governor, Adrian Wiley. Adrian Wiley, he's a businessman. He has been in politics for a little while, but never in elected office. He was the chair of the Libertarian Party of Florida for a time. His business was a small business that catered to other small businesses, companies that, as far as I know, his company catered to companies that were too small to have an entire IT department, but too large to just have maybe one guy for their IT. So he filled that niche there. Needless to say, since he's been on the campaign trail, his business has suffered, and he's lost a lot of business because campaigning for governor of Florida is definitely a full-time job. And he's doing it. I honestly believe that Adrian Wiley is honest, so I'm not only supporting him because I don't support Scott and Crist, but I'm actually supporting him because I think he actually believes in what he's doing. He believes in the causes that he's promoting, and I think he's honest, which is more than I can say about almost any politician. Meanwhile, Scott is still a hundreds of millions millionaire, and Wiley, his small business is suffering because he's doing what he thinks is right. But specifically, as far as just a few of his policies, I did mention the gun stance. Adrian Wiley is for open carry. He does believe that we should have open carry, like most states in the union actually do. More states allow open carry than even shall issue concealed carry permits. And a lot of states you don't even need a permit. Most states you don't need a permit to open carry. A lot of states the gun can't be loaded. Some states it can be. But I mean, some states that support open carry. Texas does not of handguns, but of long guns they do. But New Mexico, Arizona, Vermont, New Hampshire, Virginia, Pennsylvania. And I'm sure, and most states. Those are just a few examples of states that do allow open carry. Let's go on to fiscal issues. Adrian does have a several-point plan, a several-point economic plan. A couple of points I'll elaborate on here. First, he does support cutting the state budget by about 30%. To some Republicans, and especially to some Democrats, that might sound draconian or evil or whatever. But when you put it in context, that was the budget under Jeb Bush back in the early 2000s. And Florida was spending a lot of money back then. I forget if it was back then or with the way that Bush and Jeb Bush and Crist and Scott increased it. But either way, either the budget then or the budget now is actually more than the Russian Federation spends on their military. So that's kind of a huge, massive budget for the state of Florida, in my opinion. You know, it's coming from our tax dollars. I'm a worker here, so it hurts us. So he wants to cut state spending by 30%, which, as I just demonstrated, I don't think is terribly draconian. He wants to couple that with a 100% homestead property tax credit, which means that if you own a single home or if you own several homes, your first primary home would be exempt from property tax. Property tax would still apply to secondary homes, and it would also apply to businesses owning land, owning property, but it would not apply to your first home. I think this is really great. I think it promotes home ownership without creating a distortion in the economy, such as artificially low interest rates from the Federal Reserve, or tax benefits to such as the interest rate in the mortgage interest rate tax deduction. I don't see this as being distortionary. I see that this as being sustainable and being able to help people who are struggling to stay in their homes. If you own your home, you should own your home. You shouldn't have to pay rent to the state for the right to stay on your land and your home. Obviously, I wish that we didn't have any property taxes at all, but I think a 100% homestead property tax credit is a step in the right direction. One more specific point of Adrian Wiley's economic plan that I'm a huge supporter of is the Interstate Commerce Act. He proposes, like people in other states I believe have proposed, I don't think it's gotten through anywhere, but similar bills have gotten through specifically related to firearms. What he wants to do with what other states have done with firearms freedom acts, he wants to do with the entire economy in Florida. He says that if there are goods and services that are created, manufactured, produced, and sold within the state of Florida, he wants to get the federal government out of it. He believes that the Interstate Commerce Clause does not give the federal government all this power, the infinite power that the feds have taken to regulate and micromanage every single little part of the economy based on, as far as I can remember, was it, I want to say it was, let's see, it was a Supreme Court decision. I'll get that for you in a second, but I definitely support his idea for abolishing, for the Interstate Commerce Act. And by the way, that Supreme Court case is Wickard v. Filburn. I just remembered it. So the Wickard v. Filburn essentially gave the federal government infinite power by the Interstate Commerce Act. So, and you can look online. I'm not going to get into that because that's not dealing specifically with our Florida politics here. But he does want to pass this law, sign it into law, that would essentially kick the federal government out of our economy that deals with just Florida. If you deal over interstate lines, yeah, you'd still be subject to federal regulations. But if you're dealing just in Florida, there's no reason the Fed should get involved, and I totally agree with Adrian Wiley on that point. I think between the homestead property tax exemption and the Interstate Commerce Act, if both of those were somehow to make it through the Florida legislature and pass, I think we would have a boon here in Florida. I think we'd have people moving down. I think we'd have businesses opening up, and I think it would really get our economy going. Right now, the only part of the economy down here that seems to be going is real estate, and that's only because people like moving to Florida and people like buying second and third homes here. But it's not real economic growth except for people who like the sunshine. So I covered a little bit about the Florida governor's race. I do want to cover two ballot initiatives real quick. This will only take me a couple minutes. Amendment 1 to the first proposed amendment to the Florida State Constitution that's going to be on the ballot in a week and a couple of days on Election Day deals with taking money that was previously used for something to do with protecting either waterways or something to do with water, using that money again for its original purpose, because a few years back, I think by legislative action, not by constitutional amendment, that money had been redirected. So the ballot initiative aims to redirect that money toward what it was originally supposed to go for. I know that one of my friends does oppose it because it deals with essentially the state. It guarantees that the state is going to be buying up land and reclaiming land for protection of water or something like that. And he thinks that the state or localities can do this without some sort of a mandate. I forget the exact details. I'm undecided on it. I might not make a decision by next Tuesday. If I don't, I'm not going to vote for it or against it. I'm just going to abstain from voting on that one. What I do know is that it states that it will not increase the state budget either way, whether it passes or not. So we'll see. Second of all, Amendment 2, which is the medical marijuana amendment. And I do have, in addition to my Adrian Wiley shirt, I am wearing my Yes on 2 button there. And I do strongly support Yes on 2. I support voting for the amendment to the Florida Constitution, which will allow for Floridians to be prescribed by a licensed physician medical marijuana and be issued a license or an identification by the state government, by the Department of Health, that will allow you to get the medical marijuana. As a libertarian, obviously, I support decriminalization and legalization of all drugs. I think starting off with medical marijuana is a good step. I've heard that Colorado, they had medical marijuana for quite a while until they legalized it about a year ago, actually. So, actually, I think they legalized it 2 years ago, but it went into effect a year ago. I think that's it. So, and the argument against prohibition is very simple. You can look to the 20s, look to alcohol prohibition. You can look to the existence of the drug cartels right now and the violence on the Mexican border. Specifically with marijuana, there's a lot of interest against it because there's a lot of people out there, a lot of libertarians as well as a lot of people from all over the political spectrum who talk about all these different benefits of marijuana health-wise and biological, chemical. It helps the cells, it helps stave off cancer, it helps do a lot of this stuff. What I do know for a fact, talking with a couple of doctors who I know very, very well and very personally, they've actually seen not marijuana, but the synthetic marijuana, Marinol, being used at nursing homes and other places for appetite stimulant for people who can't otherwise eat or would eat very little and not eat enough to even live. So, and that said, some people, from what I've read, cannot handle that Marinol, that synthetic pill. One thing that I did read about it is Marinol is pretty much all THC. There's no other cannabinoids in it. And marijuana has, 200 or 300 different cannabinoids, different chemicals in it that all work together with the endocannabinoid system, which every person is born with. It's very interesting. I have another friend who thinks that marijuana is a God drug. It's from God. It's a plant that he planted here and gave us the endocannabinoid system, and we wouldn't have it unless he created it like that. I don't know. I don't take stances on that, but I think it's very interesting to listen to all this stuff. Either way, I do fully support Yes on Amendment 2. I think it's a good first step toward trying to deal with prohibition of drugs and the violence and the other problems that are caused by it, as well as I think it'll help some people who are really, really sick and who are really suffering and might not be able to handle pain pills the same way they might be able to handle marijuana. On that note, I didn't mean to make the video run so long, but I did just finish my Yuengling, so I will probably be back tomorrow or Tuesday by the latest. On that note, enjoy the rest of the World Series. It's 2-2. I'm pulling for the Kansas City Royals only because they haven't made the playoffs since, the 80s? Playoffs, right, Jim Mora? No, just kidding. But anyway, let's go Leopards. We'll see you guys at Yankee Stadium in about a month. Peace.